Hi everyone, it is a Sunday evening of a beautiful sunny day in central London, which is where I am at the moment, and I suddenly found myself wandering around the flat reflecting on how I've been reading recently and discovering there's huge piles of books all over the place, or a large number of books around my flat, which I've started and not yet got round to finishing. I'm not a good person at stopping reading books I'm not enjoying, which is not to say I'm not enjoying these, as I'll get onto. And I'm also someone who gathers quite a lot of books into my life, you'll be unsurprised to hear. And I was collecting these books as I walked around and thought I might do a quick video on what they are, and maybe something will come out of that on what I read fast and what I don't get through in one sitting. A lot of the books I read, if not in one sitting, then certainly in a day. So here is the pile of books I found as I went round my flat this evening. So first up, two books both of which were on the Republic of Consciousness lists earlier this year. I talked a bit about those at the time. A Trib and Other Stories won the prize, and I was at the announcement for that, so I came back and I sat down that evening and started writing a bit. It is experimental fiction, short stories. It's gorgeously written. It is not quick prose to read, and I read a bit that evening, got caught up in other things, didn't get back to it. I feel really guilty about this one. Guilt is going to be a theme throughout this video. I feel really guilty about this one. I know I need to get onto it. It may be my first choice for this evening as soon as I've got this finished. But that said, there's also Die, My Love, which not only was on the Republic of Consciousness list, it was also then on the Man Booker International list. And this I got much further through before I got distracted. And it's a relatively short book, although again, quite emotionally hard going and quite tight, dense prose. It is, to my mind, Plath-like in its intensity of mad, unacceptable feelings in a woman. It is set in the south of France, or the middle of France, with an Argentinian woman who is going through all sorts of weird psychological states. It's a book that I really enjoyed when I started, so I'm torn now between a Trib and this for the rest of my reading for this evening. The next couple are gifts that I received, and one of them I asked for, the other I received randomly from my brother for Christmas. That one was this book, Confessions of a Sociopath, which is autobiography by a woman who has identified herself as a sociopath, is not criminal, and writes about what it is like to be a sociopath whilst also not being criminal. That's why that fact is relevant. It's interesting psychologically in the way that hearing about the way somebody else thinks when they think so completely differently to you is interesting. It's quite painfully, tediously written. It's I mostly read literary fiction. This is by no means, well, it's neither literary nor fiction. It's quite hard going in terms of the reading. I've got a bit stuck. To be honest, I'm not sure that the excitement of understanding a very different character is sufficient for me to get through to the end of this book. But that said, I write quite heavily psychological fiction, and from that point of view, the ability to get inside the head of somebody who thinks in a very, very different way is exciting to me. So maybe for research purposes, I will go back to this book, Confessions of a Sociopath. The other book I received as a gift was Mick Herron's Slow Horses. I have a bit of a thing about herons, as anyone who reads my Facebook page will know. I go looking for them when I'm feeling depressed. There's a park near me in London where I can pretty well guarantee to spot a heron, and they're wonderful, wonderful birds. So I received Mick Herron's Slow Horses. I had it recommended to me as a brilliant spy novel in the model of John le Carré. I should do a video about spy novels at some stage. Le Carré I grew up on, love for his psychological subtlety, as well as the beautiful way he writes and the tension of the stories and the atmosphere he creates in the stories he writes, especially the ones about the Cold War. So when I was told that Mick Herron was the modern day Le Carré, I got excited. I started reading it, and it's I found it a bit dull. Is that okay? Am I allowed to say that? It is, so it's set in contemporary London. It is a guy who is, the central character, Jackson Lamb, is a guy who is failed at almost everything in life. And as far as I've got in this book anyway, is failing at being a spy as well. And it's all a bit depressing. It's set in a depressing, rundown part of town. The characters are depressing, rundown people. They're failing at what they're doing. There isn't a super exciting story behind it. It doesn't have the subtlety of prose of Le Carré. And I just found myself not really wanting to read any more of it. And as I say, I love spy novels. So it was a bit of a surprise to me. I'm not sure I'm going to go back to this one, to be honest, despite it having been a gift and despite me having asked for it. I think I might give this one away. That was Mick Herron's Slow Horses. Lots of people absolutely love them, so don't take my word for it if you think it might be the sort of thing that appeals to you. Yeah, Mick Herron, not my thing at the moment, but I will come back to Le Carré. The next one is L'Anglaise by Helen Mundler. This is published by my publisher, by Holland House, and I went to the launch for this book in London a couple of months ago, maybe a month or so ago. It is about an English woman living in France, hence L'Anglaise, and I got really excited about this at the reading because the section that Helen read reminded me enormously of McEwan's On Chesil Beach. So she read a section about a woman on her wedding night or a shy woman on her wedding night in the mid-20th century with the marriage already clearly going wrong at this stage. And the psychological acuity of that really appealed to me. I have to say, I only then got in about the first 10 pages when I got home that evening and then got distracted by work and trying to do my own writing. So this is one that I need to get back to. It's not a short book, but I'm excited. I'm excited about getting back to this one, actually. And it's interesting in its portrayal of motherhood, I suspect, as well, and the relationships between mothers and daughters, which is a topic that interests me enormously. So, L'Anglaise by Helen Mundler. I then have these two, which are both proofs and therefore impossible for you to identify. They're both from Galley Beggar, which is a UK small press. One of them is Toby Litt's Wrestliana, which I'm enjoying because he's a fabulous writer, but I don't feel like the target audience for this. It is a book about masculinity and fatherhood as well as about writing. And it feels to me, and I read a very large number of books by men and don't normally think about that aspect of what I'm reading much at all. It feels to me like a book which is written for men and is being very, very highly rated by a large number of people. I haven't, to my knowledge, read any reviews of it by women. I might go and look some out. I'd be very interested to see how other women are finding this book. It's very subtle in its exploration of masculinity and fatherhood and what it means to be a man who sits at a desk and isn't sporty and isn't strong. But those are not topics which I personally am hugely excited by at this stage in my life. So Toby Litt's Wrestliana, I am about half of the way through. Will continue to read. I'm very grateful to have the proof to be able to look at this, although it's now published. But not one where I am reading it and feeling a great sense of personal identification with the content. The other one is Lucia. I don't know why I'm holding it up, but here it is, Lucia, by Alex Faby, whose book Playthings I read and very much enjoyed a couple of years ago. This I am really enjoying. It's about James Joyce's daughter Lucia, or Lucia, I don't know how she pronounced it. She was living in Italy much of her life, so I assume Lucia. And I've talked about it a little bit on a couple of previous videos, but it is wonderfully imaginative. I'm also learning a lot more about ancient Egypt than I thought a book about a woman who was born in Italy and lived out her life in a lunatic asylum in the UK would tell me. So there we are. There are all sorts of things you don't know that you don't know. So Alex Faby, very much very much enjoying. And if you're interested in the inside of the brain of someone who is weird and has some sort of madness, then his novel Playthings from probably 2016, I highly recommend. I'm also started this afternoon the only bit of non-fiction in this crowd, which is a book called Drawing Down the Moon. It is about witches, druids, goddess worshippers and other pagans in America. I'm reading this for research. I am in the process of doing some rewriting of my second novel with some thoughts from my extremely insightful, I think, publisher feeding into that. And so I am exploring some themes which I might want to feed a little bit more intensively into that novel. They're already there, so if anyone's interested in witchcraft, I have a novel coming which talks a bit about witchcraft, but I decided I needed to know more, so I'm reading Drawing Down the Moon. And then the final two, Muriel Spark's The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, I found on the bookshelf behind me. It's a book of my husband's, I didn't realise we owned it, a couple of nights ago. It is very thin. Muriel Spark I'm increasingly excited by. I picked up a few of her books a couple of years ago, Memento Mori, Girl of Slender Means, or The Girls of Slender Means, and something else whose name I now forget, and hadn't realised that Spark was technically and formally so interesting in the weirdness of some of her approaches to literature. Her books always come from a somewhat odd slant, whether that is in the characters or in the sometimes rather twisted plots, or in the case of Memento Mori, in the whole sort of semi, it's not magical realism, there's a sort of fantastical element to Memento Mori as well. So I am enjoying the weirdness of Muriel Spark at the moment. She was a name I had heard for many, many years and sort of assumed was a not very interesting, well-brought-up novelist of the mid-20th century. That's showing my prejudices maybe. But I've discovered that's not what she is at all, and I'm enjoying her very much. So Muriel Spark, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. And then the final one is a book by Angela Leighton, who is a poet and literary critic, I think primarily. I came across this book when I asked my Facebook friends, who are a literary lot, about interesting recent autobiographical works by women which were experimental and formally interesting. And that partly came out of the Deborah Levy, which I was reading recently, Things I Don't Want to Know and The Cost of Living. It also came out of the fact that I am, slightly to my surprise, writing some autobiographical fragments at the moment, and I didn't want to be putting them into a standard autobiographical format of I was born at this place and I grew up over this period of time and then I did this and then I did that. And I was looking to understand what other people, and particularly women, had been doing recently in terms of the way in which they were structuring and otherwise putting together autobiography. And Angela Leighton's Spills was recommended to me by a friend, Kevin Jackson, who is an extremely erudite man. And it is a combination of short prose pieces, bits of poetry, bits of fantasy. It is fragmentary, which is where my piece is going as well. It's also, amusingly enough, the opening piece in here is set in Wakefield, which is a city in the north of the UK, which is about 8 miles from where I grew up and the place where I got married. So there is a nice piece of synchronicity in the Angela Leighton and my own piece that I'm writing at the moment. This, I suspect, is a really, really good book. I started it on a train yesterday evening, and it's going to take concentration. It's not going to be an easy read, but this is one that I'm excited by. So anyway, that's it. Those are the things which are sitting around the flat at the moment, half read. I feel as I've unburdened myself by confessing I have so many books around the flat at the moment that are half read. I tend to get to the end of things rather than stopping. I think on all of those, except maybe the Sociopath book and the Mick Herron, I will get to the end of them, which will be great. I may or may not talk about them when I get onto it, when I have finished them. But yes, if anyone is interested in what I read beyond the specific books I talk about on this channel, then that is a slightly wider selection than I sometimes put out here to talk about in detail. There we are. I'm off now to enjoy the rest of this summer evening, probably with either a trib or die, my love.